So many people whom Boris has touched have suffered as a consequence of that association. You only have to think of Nazanin, Zaghari, Ratcliffe, and the massive impact she said his words had on her, and that caused her detention in Iran. Boris apparently was shocked by what she said to him. When she was released, she was taken to number 10. There was a photo opportunity with her MP and with Boris. And she made it quite clear that she was caught up in the consequences of Boris's garrulity. Because of Boris, she was branded a person who had created a propaganda campaign against the regime. And she suffered in consequence. Something the family said had a massive impact. And she said to Boris that she had lived in the shadow of his words. But she's not the only person who has suffered because of association with Boris. I think, frankly, the entire country has suffered because of association with Boris, and we're still suffering the fallout. The Rishi Sunak regime is simply another aspect of the stuff that Boris has touched. Boris has, I remember years and years ago, I met a fellow who said to me that his name was Midas, and I said, "Oh, why?" Thinking he was going to tell me about the great successes he had, but he suggested his name was ironic because everything he touched went wrong, and that's Boris. Certainly, the Boris who came to power as prime minister, everything he touched and everyone he touched was affected. You can start off with Richard Sharp. Nobody apparently has got a good word for him, yet he stays on until he can be replaced. Richard Sharp, crony of Boris, crony of Rishi Sunak. Cameron, Mrs. May, Gove, all touched by Boris. Dominic Cummings, left to feed on a platter of bitter resentment on his website, a stream of bile and tittle-tattle, a clever man brought to ruin. Lee Kane, who spoke of his observation of a party steeped in division, both reputation in tatters. Dan Rosenfield, the chief of staff, who was branded by Sue Gray as part of the failure of leadership. Munira Mirza, who Boris had said was one of the great women in his life, who criticised Boris for his scurrilous smear against Keir Starmer over his failure to prosecute Jimmy Savile. And Johnson's refusal to apologise for that was the last straw. But what have we heard of her since her resignation? Martin Reynolds, or Party Marty. He was the person behind the Bring Your Own Booze. He will now always be known simply by that sobriquet. Jack Doyle, who was at the same parties, well, at least some of them anyway, the policeman's son, who is on record saying that the whole thing was the recent weeks have taken a terrible toll on my family life. You know, your job shouldn't impact so heavily on your personal life, but it does because of the way Boris's chaos has dominated. Mark Sedwill, replaced by Johnson as cabinet secretary with Simon Case, who was literally caught in the Partygate scandal, demonized as a worm, and he still faces investigations himself now for, I think, bullying as well. Allegra Stratton, the briefing journalist, caught on camera admitting the double standards of partying during lockdown. Jack Doyle, James Slack, Guto Hari, the fellow who took the knee, Alex Allen, the ministerial standards man who, under Cameron and May, was so perfectly okay, but who managed barely 16 months under Boris, who quit after issuing the report about Priti Patel, whose behaviour he judged amounted to what can only be described as bullying. All of these people. Chris Bryant said that Alan's reputation was tarnished by his association with Boris. It goes on. Christopher Gates, the private secretary to the Queen, who was brought into number 10 and barely survived. Even the person who put up the wallpaper, the gold wallpaper in the flat, Lulu Little, reputation damaged by association. Anything Boris touched, it's hardly surprising he had gold wallpaper. He had the Midas touch in reverse. That gold wallpaper is probably not gold anymore, is it? The moment it gets into Boris's hands, the moment it is touched, everything, even gold, turns to dirt. And that's the problem. The problem is that anything Boris touched goes wrong. That, I suppose, would include Brexit. And so many people were taken in by him.